We're just setting up here. Good evening. Welcome everyone to another discussion on the Bhagavad Gita. I'm so happy to be with you this evening. Thank you for sharing your time and to be with me this evening. So we'll begin by first chanting a few of the invocation mantras, which are mantras of gratitude and respect to the principle of teacher in yoga and in our lineage of bhakti yoga, gratitude and respect.
Lakshmi, I'm
Yeah,
sorry to interrupt you.
no problem.
I don't know about the others, but I get a lot of noise when people leave the mic open.
Uh-huh.
You have to learn how to mute it.
Okay, let's see what we can do here.
Thank you.
You just have to tell everybody to mute mic from the beginning of the class, and
Yes.
then you can mute everybody. Like you will click here and you can mute anybody. Only you can do that.
Okay, how is that now, Eleanor? Is everyone muted?
I don't see that. Sid is open and this other person,
You can mute all.
now it happened.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So this evening, chapter 5, we'll continue our discussion of reactionless action. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshuru Militam Jena Tasmai Sri Guruve Namah. Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirbhishesha Shunyavadi Pastyatya Dishatarine. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nijananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So March 15th, chapter 5 of the Bhagavad Gita. I believe we left off on text 9 of chapter 5. And this chapter is entitled Karma Yoga, Action in Krishna Consciousness. Yeah. So one who performs his duty without attachment, surrendering the results unto the Supreme, is unaffected by sinful action, as the lotus leaf is untouched by water. You'll find quite often throughout the Vedic literatures the analogy of the lotus flower for its beauty and its practicality. Herein, the lotus flower is seen to be in a pond of water but never gets wet because it has a protective coating on it. So this one who performs his duty without attachment, surrendering the results unto the Supreme, is unaffected by sinful action, as the lotus leaf is untouched by water. So as the lotus leaf does not get wet, even immersed in a pond, so one who is in this world and acting in this world does not become affected by it when the proper mindset is there. So the difference, like in the second chapter, if you remember, there's a mention by Krishna of Buddhi Yoga. And Buddhi Yoga is Buddhi means intelligence and yoga means linking with the Supreme through proper utilization of one's intelligence. So in this particular verse, we're describing how if we change our perspective, our perception of the world, from a me-centered universe where everything is for my enjoyment and all accomplishments and all work and all results to work to benefit me, that is what entangles us. That kind of perception of the world around us entangles us. And that's that famous verse I've quoted a few times out of the third chapter, Jagnartat karmano nyatra loko yam karma bandhana. So work that is in relationship with the Supreme or connected to the Supreme is liberating. But work which is connected to the material realm is binding. Karma bandhana means bound by your actions and the reactions to those actions. Karma bandhana. So basically, this is the same kind of description. If our perception is without attachment, without possessiveness. Rupa Goswami describes possessiveness or being free from possessiveness as seeing things in relationship to the Supreme. Not that we renounce. It's not that we give up family, we give up job, we give up all the things that we are involved in this world. We simply act on them or act within them with a different state of mind. So that changes one's perspective of the world. So rather than it being me-centered, then what happens is it becomes God-centered, where the actions and the flow of action and the meditation and the mindset involved in those actions is in relationship to the Supreme, as an offering to the Supreme. Jagnartat karmano nyatra, that means action that is performed as a sacrifice to the Supreme, that is liberating. So Krishna in these next verses is making a very strong point about action in the proper state of mind, proper consciousness, is real yoga, is yoga of an active level rather than renunciate yoga. Krishna talks about in the Bhagavad Gita, as does Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras, talks about two yogas: action yoga, Kriya yoga, karma yoga, bhakti yoga, as opposed to Jnana yoga, or Patanjali talks about Ashtanga yoga in the Yoga Sutras. Krishna Jnana yoga, and a subset of Jnana yoga is Dhyana yoga in the 6th chapter, the yoga of meditation, contemplation, still coming from the Jnana perspective or the knowledge perspective. So when one acts with this knowledge in mind, that what is the knowledge? I'm really me, my existence is not the body. The body is a temporary residence. Just like you may rent an apartment, and you have like last year from 2022 of February to 2023, we rented a house. When the lease was over, then we had to vacate the house. So we ended up in a new house. We bought a house instead of renting. So when we have a body, when we're in that body, we are in it temporarily. It is really not ours, but it is something we are utilizing. So the recognition, when we have a God-centered universe rather than a me-centered universe, is whatever I have, whatever possessions I have, including the body, the senses, the mind, the intelligence, the ego, all are in relationship to service to the Supreme, focused on the Supreme as an offering to the Supreme. That kind of action becomes reactionless. And that's the kind of action that Krishna is encouraging Arjuna to perform. Because Arjuna was raising the query in both the 3rd chapter of Gita and the 5th chapter of the Gita. Krishna, you're talking about renunciation, and you're telling me to do my duty. My duty involves action as a warrior, specifically to kill my opponents. I'm very confused about that. So that's why Krishna is getting into more and more detail about reactionless action, so that Arjuna, who is a representative of humanity, so that we will benefit by this dialogue, he's asking these questions so that we can understand we can act in this world. Because most of us, 98% of the world's population is going to be active. There are very, very few that can genuinely, authentically renounce the world. There are many who pretend renunciation. They're called pretenders. They may take the dress of a renunciate or feign the lifestyle of a renunciate, but in actuality, they're harboring desires, and they're looking for ways and means, even within their guise as renunciates are looking to enjoy for themselves. So that's why majority of the world is active, and that's why Krishna is giving these instructions, how to be active, but not to be entangled by the reactions to those actions. And this is text 11. The yogis, abandoning attachment, act with body, mind, intelligence, and even with the senses only for the purpose of purification. We discussed that the whole practice of yoga is meant for purification, is meant for education, is meant to lead us to meditation. So all of this is the purificatory rite, so to speak, the yajna, or the sacrifice that we're performing, cultivating a particular mindset, which is the mindset of offering. This is my action as an offering. So when we're cultivating that mindset, that is how we abandon attachment, and not artificially so. That's what Krishna is not here encouraging us to be artificial renunciates, or he's not even encouraging us to be renunciates at all, unless that is our genuine desire and nature. But most of our nature revolves around activity. So therefore Krishna is saying, okay, he's saying to Arjuna, don't give up your nature. You're a warrior, and you're in the role of a warrior. There's a predominant influence of rajagun, or passion. So how not to get consumed by that passion, because passion leads to an abundance of desires and attachments, by using that energy in service to the Supreme. When we make our focus God-centered, then it becomes action in service to the Supreme, rather than action in service to ourselves and our own selfish desires. It's the difference between selfish and selfless. It's not impossible to be selfless. It is highly possible when the proper mindset is being cultivated, as Krishna is saying. Abandoning attachment by offering, by performance of action with the mindset as an offering, and even actions with body, mind, intelligence, and the senses are only for the purpose of purification. Text 12, the steadily devoted soul attains unadulterated peace because he offers the result of all activities to Krishna, to me, he's saying. Whereas a person who is not in union with the divine, who is greedy for the fruits of his labor, becomes entangled. Again, further elaboration on a very similar point. The steadily devoted soul attains unadulterated peace. So what is that? One who is cultivating that mindset of connection with the Supreme, one of the byproducts of such a cultivation of that mindset is unadulterated peace. Even Patanjali describes yoga, the very act of yoga, yogas chitta vritti nirodha, that it's calmness, it's peacefulness, it's freedom. So Krishna is saying that, and contrary to that, whereas a person who is not in union with the divine, a person who is not in yoga, not in the performance of yoga or the act of connecting to the Supreme, to the divine, who is greedy for the fruits of the labor, wants to enjoy, that comes from the me-centered universe, becomes entangled. So all of these points are similar points, nuanced in a different way. When the embodied living, this is text 13, when the embodied living being controls his nature and mentally renounces all actions, he resides happily in the city of 9 gates, the material body, neither working nor causing work to be done. So this is a very interesting concept that Krishna is getting into right now. If we are within the body, but not of the body, in other words, we're temporarily residing in the body. And there's a verse in the 3rd chapter where Krishna says that Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani karmasha. So he says that the modes of material nature, sattvagun, rajagun, and tamagun, or goodness, passion, and ignorance. The modes of material nature are what is actually causing things to be done. Because the soul, and this is why Krishna is emphasizing the cultivation of knowledge, because the cultivation of knowledge from the perspective of the Bhagavad Gita is to understand the various components at play around us. The two basic components of Prakriti and Purusha, and then the subcategories within Prakriti and Purusha. So what is the subcategories of Prakriti? Earth, water, fire, air, ether. Those are the 5 gross elements. Mind, intelligence, ego. Those are the 3 subtle elements. So those knowledge means understanding that the external world, the material world, are comprised of those elements, those 8 elements of earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and ego. And to see that and understand that, and to understand that the body is comprised of those elements, but yet the body is not in and of itself able to be motivated. In other words, those material elements in and of themselves cannot be motivated. They are not the motivational force. This is knowledge. That the motivational force which causes those elements to come together, like I use the analogy of conception, what is the motivational force which causes a lump of cells in the ovum to begin to to reshape themselves into a body, and that body grows and grows, eventually reaching a particular age where it comes out and exists independent of the mother. So what is it? It's the presence of the soul, the jiva, that causes those cells within the ovum to transform into a body, which serves as a yantra arudhani mayaya, yantra, a machine made of material elements. It causes the presence of the soul, which is contained in the sperm, causes the ovum to have a meeting of Prakriti and Purush. That combination, that infusion of jiva into the cells, and the life force which emanates from the soul causes the motivation, gives motivation to the elements. So that is also knowledge. That's what Krishna is talking about of knowledge. So we're actually seeing the distinction of what's going on. We see the world around us and all life having the same uniform singularity, which is called Brahman, the spiritual energy. All life force. That is why ahimsa is a very strong component in the practice of yoga. Whatever form of yoga, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, hatha yoga, this principle of ahimsa is an extremely important thing, because when we are situated in knowledge, we can see distinction. We can actually see the distinction and the oneness simultaneously. That's the beauty. It gives us such a broad perspective that we can see distinction, like in the elements, the difference between earth, water, fire, air, ether, and the difference between the subtle elements. We can see that distinction, but yet simultaneously understand the oneness. The oneness is the Brahman, that which gives life to all souls. The soul is a finite aspect of Brahman. And that's where we are all uniformly one, but simultaneously separate and distinct. Krishna makes that very same point in the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, where he says to Arjuna, never was there a time when I did not exist, Arjuna, when I did not exist, Krishna did not exist, nor you, Arjuna, never was there a time when you did not exist, nor all these kings on the battlefield. And to extrapolate upon that point, all life, never was there a time when all life did not exist, because the very nature of being alive indicates the presence of the soul. So this is knowledge, and acting with this knowledge. That's why the Bhagavad Gita is so important. Sometimes when I do a yoga teacher training course to people who are aspiring to be yoga teachers, the question comes up, is the Bhagavad Gita really important to me where I'm at right now? And the answer to that is yes. If you want to teach yoga, knowledge is a very important aspect of yoga, because it gives us the understanding that we need in order to be in a yogic state. So we see the distinction, the categories in Prakriti, but we also see the distinction, the categories in Purusha. And what is that? Basically, you have the Jiva, the finite aspect of Brahman, and then you have or Atman, and then you have Param Atman. Then you have the supreme, infinite aspect of Brahman that has different features. The feature of personality is Bhagavan, the feature of Paramatma, or the presence in the heart as Supersoul, that's divinity, present in the heart. And then the feature of the uniform, the immortal, imperishable abode of happiness, which is called Brahman. Krishna describes that in the 14th chapter, the last verse of the 14th chapter. So we're able to see, and then when you begin to think of looking at the world from that perspective, then we can actually relate to the notion of being detached. And really, from the Bhakti Yoga perspective, we'll get into that later, Bhakti Yoga doesn't really ask you to detach. Rather, it asks you to become attached to the Supreme, attached to the notion of a God-centered universe. And then the subsequent response, when you do that, when you become attached to making offerings to divinity, to the Supreme, then natural detachment follows. It doesn't have to be a separate endeavor. So to understand that point is a very important principle, and it's also a principle of knowledge again. So it also allows us to see the soul as the non-doer, because everything is going on as we observe it, pushed by the modes of material nature. But simultaneously, and this may become a little confusing, as the doer, passive doer. And the analogy that's used I believe it's in the Vedanta Sutra, is a young boy observes the father lifting up something heavy. And of course, young children have a desire to emulate their parents. So a young boy sees his father picking up something heavy, he wants to do that also. But let's say let's say here in my house, I have a 50-pound bag of soil. So I go to the garden shop and I pick up that 50-pound bag, I put it on my shoulder, I put it into my car, I come home, my son sees me pick up that 50-pound bag, put it on my shoulder, and walk it over to the garden. And he has that desire to do the same thing. But he doesn't have the physical capacity to do it, to pick up 50 pounds at this point. But he has the desire. So what happens? Father, seeing that the son possesses that desire, helps him. So there's doership, but yet there's not doership. In other words, without the help or the assistance of the father, the son could not lift that bag. So similarly, we are in this world, in this body, which is being activated by the modes of material nature. But yet, what is the jiva? What is the soul doing? The soul is desiring. The soul has a desire for action. And it has this desire to experience the results of that action, the fruits of that action. So in that way, when Krishna is saying become detached, when we have knowledge, we're able to understand these various distinctions and designations within the categories of Prakriti and Purusha, or the material energy as opposed to the spiritual energy. And that helps us in our quest to act free from attachment to the results of our actions. Is that clear? I know it's a little complicated. Is it clear? If anyone has at this particular junction any question, observation, comment, please feel free to do so. Anyone?
My knowledge is very, very, very small, but I understood that soul does absolutely nothing.
Yeah, that's why I raised this point.
Yeah.
Because the modes of material nature would not even be able to act without the presence of the soul and the desires of the soul. So the actual physical machinations, what's going on, that's the modes working. The soul is not doing it. It's the material elements motivated by the modes of material nature. But what starts out the whole thing, that's why I used that analogy of the boy. What starts that whole thing is desire, the desire of the living entity. If we have no desire to enjoy, then what action is going to be performed? So that the actual physical movements and all that, that's Rajagun. Action is Rajagun. Knowledge, the more subtle aspects of our interaction with the material nature, that's Sattva-gun. The laziness, indolence, sleep, that's Tamagun. So all those things are happening and causing, the flow of movement going on. But the doership on our part, because one of the dangers of thinking I have nothing to do with this, what's going on, with that notion, that comes out of the Sankhya Shariraka. That comes directly out of that, and I think you took Edwin's class. But the Vedanta Sutra counters it by saying there is responsibility by the jiva, because the jiva has desires which set everything into motion. So to think that I have nothing to do with this is sometimes it's not a good way to approach it. especially if you think, well, this is happening, I really didn't do it. I'm just the observer and all this is going on. So it
No,
holds
my
us accountable.
soul is the observer, not
Right?
me. My soul is the observer, not me. Me is this construction, my ego, my buddhi, my manas. But
Right.
the soul is separate.
Yes. And the
So I would
soul,
be desiring,
yes,
not the soul.
yes,
Okay.
yeah. Very good. Any other question?
I have a question.
Okay.
What is that? What, first of all, in the book, it has in parentheses, when they talk about the ninth gate, and that's the body. But what are those 9 gates?
2 eyes, 2 nostrils, 2 ears. So what's that? 2, 4,
The mouth
6, 7, mouth, anus, 8, and the
and
genitals, 9.
Oh, okay, excellent. Thank
That's
you.
the city of 9 gates. Because everything is coming in and out of those gates.
Ah,
And that's why the metaphor is used, the city of 9 gates. In the Bhagavad Purana, Srimad Bhagavatam, there's a whole section which uses that metaphor to explain the soul either trapped or the soul liberated. So it's how we use those 9 gates. If we use it for our own enjoyment, it becomes entangling. In other words, if we use our eyes, our nose, our senses, for taking in this data and transforming this data into thought and other aspects, and it becomes the source of our entanglement, then we get bound to this world. But on the other hand, if through the yogic process or the yogic strategy, if we're taking in all this data and we're seeing it in the proper perspective that it's to be used in service to the Supreme, then that same function becomes liberating, and it becomes reactionless action. That even though we're acting in this world, there's no reaction to it. That's why Krishna previously discussed karma, vikarma, akarma. Action that is good action basically goes by, by the sacred text, by the advice and guidance of the sacred text. And there's a good reaction to that kind of action.
so
Then
there's a way of looking at the metaphor of the gates, is that we have the ability to open them and close them.
right. Yes, we do. That's why, what does Patanjali mean when he says pratyahara, right? There's yama, niyama, asana, pranayama. Then, once we get like that dimension of our world together, next thing he recommends in the Ashtanga system is pratyahara. Now you withdraw the senses and bring them within. We have that ability, and the cultivation of yoga gives us the strength, the determination, and the clarity to do pratyahara, to be able to close down the senses and to draw them within. And then from pratyahara comes dharana. That means once you go within and you're in this peaceful state of mind, this calmness, this stillness, you're able to concentrate, to focus on your alambana, which is your object of meditation. And that leads to dhyana, meditation. And ultimately, the very advanced stage of meditation, which is called samadhi. That means 100% totally focused for a period of time, a specific, minimally a specific period of time. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Celia, you okay? You have any questions? You're good. Okay. David, any questions, David?
I'm good.
Huh?
I'm good.
Okay, great. $14, I don't think I read this because it's a kind of an addition to 13. The embodied spirit, master of the city of his body, does not create activities, nor does he induce people to act, nor does he create the fruits of action. All this is enacted by the modes of material nature, as we discussed. Nor does, this is 15, nor does the Supreme Lord assume anyone's sinful or pious activities. Embodied beings, however, are bewildered because of the ignorance which covers their real knowledge. What is that? Avidya, ignorance. It's identifying with the body, mind, and senses as the self. That is basically the effects of ignorance or avidya. We identify this male body, female body, white body, black body, etc., as the self, and attach ourselves to that misperception. And when we look at the world and the world's problems, I don't think it's simplistic to say, because people are not aware of that very basic, very rudimentary point of knowledge in yoga, that the world's problems exist to the degree that they exist. I mean, how much, when you look at it objectively, how much distinction is there between Russian and Ukrainian? I mean, if you know people that are Russian and people that are Ukrainian, if you have relationships with them, you say, oh, sure, there's some cultural differences, etc. And then you talk about the Irish, the North Irish, and it just becomes ludicrous. You have in the same village in India, you have Hindu and Muslim, Indian bodied, but one dynasty of family was converted at a particular time when occupation was there. All this upadi, the Sanskrit word is upadi, layers of designation, all of it in ignorance of the real fact. Knowledge means you can recognize it. Ignorance means you don't recognize it, and thus become attached to being a female or a male or genderless or pronounless or whatever diversion we get into. It's because of ignorance. And that's why Bhagavad Gita is like the ABCs of yogic understanding, because Krishna really emphasizes knowledge, understanding those categories of distinction, both on the Prakriti and Purushic levels. Understands that. So, yeah. Then we read 15.
Lakshmi, I have one more question. A quick
Yeah,
one.
shoot. Don't hesitate. Now's the time.
So the transliterations that we're reading, at the top of each chapter, not chapter, but passage,
Mm-hmm.
is that Sanskrit or Hindi?
Sanskrit.
Ah,
You see the script right under where it says text, text 15 or text 16.
yes.
That's scroll, that's actual Sanskrit.
Okay.
Then under that raga dvesha, it's called Roman transliteration,
Okay.
so that we can, even we're not Sanskritists, we don't understand Sanskrit, we're able to pronounce it. That's why Prabhupada's Gita is probably one of the most comprehensive, if not the most comprehensive Gita out there on the market, because you have the actual Sanskrit. So if you can read Sanskrit, you can see what's there. And then you have the Roman transliteration. So if you don't know Sanskrit, you can still know what's there. And then he gives you word by word breakdown. Because oftentimes that's very, to know the word by word breakdown and to know the fact that Sanskrit is a highly contextual language. So the literal may not exactly translate into what we get in the translation, only because it is the right of the translator to put the proper context to it. It will sound in English very rough and sometimes disjointed, the way the Sanskrit can be translated. So to put it into a more mellifluous flow of language, then the translator has to translate it in a particular way and give context to what's being said there. Now, Prabhupada's emphasis was contextually, this is Krishna speaking about himself, about knowledge of himself, and about how to acquire knowledge of him, the Supreme, and the Self, to understand that they're distinct. One is infinite Brahman personality, and the other one is finite Brahman personality.
Right.
Sometimes the word, the notion is tossed around, it's all one, that any kind of distinction is part of the illusion. But from the Vaishnava perspective, there's two basic takes on the Gita and Vedanta, the Vedanta Sutras. One is that there is no individuality, personality. And then the other take, which is called Vaishnav, coming from different great acharyas like Ramanujacharya, Madhvacharya, Vishnu Swami, and Nimbarka, where they clarify what's actually being said, that the oneness is that all jivas, all souls are Brahman, energy. But the distinction is they're separate, like drops of water are all part of the ocean, but there is individual drops within that ocean, that great mass. So, that's why, to get back to your question, the context is there, and the case can be made for the way the translation is coming out by understanding each word for word. And then, even beyond that, you have the commentaries. Like if you were to read the Yoga Sutras, just the Sanskrit of the Yoga Sutras, you probably wouldn't know what's going on at all. And the Vedanta Sutras is supposed to clarify everything, and that makes it even worse because it becomes even more complex. That's why, really, when we are studying texts like Yoga Sutras, Bhagavad Gita, Vedanta Sutras, Upanishads, etc., the commentaries are so important. And it's not any commentary, it has to be a qualified person who is commenting, who's making it clear, like Vyasadeva, for instance. He's considered the preeminent commentator on these various texts. Okay. Is that okay, Sid?
Just one more question.
Go ahead, shoot.
This goes along with this, and you don't have to get into it tonight because I know you want to forge ahead. But in the transliterations, there's like dots above the letters and dashes above the letters. Is that the same as in English? How you break
No,
down?
it gives a different. It actually helps in proper pronunciation and accent. So it
Okay.
is different. For instance, when you have a dot over an R, it indicates R, like RI, like Rita, Rita. So that dot helps to distinguish R as having a specific sound,
Mm-hmm.
and also accent there too. Because if you mispronounce Sanskrit, it could take on a different meaning.
Most any language.
Right.
Okay. Thank you, Lakshmi. How can I find out more about how this transliteration should be sound?
Well, there in the back of Prabhupada's Gita, he gives a kind of a general breakdown.
Oh, excellent.
So you could start there, and then if you're interested, I would recommend a beginner's course in Sanskrit. And if you're that serious, I can probably recommend a few people that would help you with that, with the beginner's course. I think there's one out in New York City at the Bhakti Center. His name is Vasudev. I think he has a beginner's course, and there are others also. But if you really want to get into the language and understanding of Sanskrit, it's very good for the brain.
Thank you.
They've done research in India where they've tested kids that studied Sanskrit from a very early age, and their brain development is like off the charts. So very stimulating.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, so
We're late then.
What's that? What's
We're
that?
late then. That we are late then.
Yes. Okay, I will. Okay, I think I'm on 16, right? Am I on 16? Yeah, okay. When, however, one is enlightened with the knowledge by which nescience is destroyed, then his knowledge reveals everything as the sun lights up everything in the daytime. That's a very nice analogy. I want to read this this commentary here. Another way to analyze how knowledge leads to liberation is as follows. There are three doers. The living entity is doer. That's number one. If he has knowledge, he realizes that all bodily activities are automatically carried out by the three modes of material nature. Therefore, the modes are doer in that respect. The modes consist of inert matter. However, thus they simply carry out activities which are desired by the living entity and sanctioned by the supersoul. So here is a further elaboration of the point I was making about the boy. Knowledge means three doers. First doer, the living entity. If he has knowledge, he realizes that all bodily activities are automatically carried out by the three modes of material nature. Therefore, the modes are doer. The modes consist of inert matter. That's exactly the point that I was making about the ovum. How is the ovum, how does it transform? By the presence of the sperm. That connection. What is it with the sperm in connection with the ovum that causes transformation of cells? It's the presence of the soul. So this is knowledge. And this is how we can sort through, things that may seem confusing by having at our fingertips knowledge. Number 17, when one's intelligence, mind, faith, and refuge are all fixed in the Supreme, then one becomes fully cleansed of misgivings through complete knowledge and thus proceeds straight on the path of liberation. A synonym for misgivings would be doubts. When we are possessed of doubt, then we hesitate. Where is our hesitation? Our hesitation is in commitment to our path. That doubt, that misgiving, causes hesitation. It causes lack of commitment and lack of determination. But when we are free from that doubt, because one's intelligence, mind, faith, and refuge become fixed in a God-centered universe rather than a me-centered universe, then that fixation, that understanding or that perspective cleanses the heart of doubt, which is the stumbling block. It prevents us from taking on the attitude which pushes us forward on our path, the path of liberation. It's described that a rocket ship, if at any moment there's not progressive movement prior to it breaking the gravitational force, then gravity will pull it back. So if, in our practice of yoga, if we have doubts, misgivings, confusions, etc., and that kind of saps our commitment level or determination level, etc., then that will cause us to hover and we can get pulled back down again by our attachments. That's why sometimes you see a person will perform, yoga. I've seen it myself. In my 51 years of involvement as a bhakti yogi, I've seen people come and go, come full swing, gung-ho, and then maybe 5, 10, 15 years later, have doubts and just give up their path. After all that hard work. There's further reason why that happens, but one of the primary reasons is doubts, misgivings. As long as that meditation is there on the Supreme, then the cleansing process is ongoing and the progression is forward. 18. The humble sages, by virtue of true knowledge, see with equal vision a learned and gentle Brahmin, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and a dog eater. True knowledge refers not only to knowing the difference between matter and spirit, but it's knowing that there is a super soul too. There is a Paramatma, a supreme soul. The learned person sees that supreme soul has impartially sanctioned the desires of all living entities, regardless of their present karmic positions. So it's yet another depth or tier of knowledge that it comes when one is immersed in swadhyaya study, self-study and study. It's the importance of Swadhyaya study. You see, Patanjali emphasizes it, particularly in Kriya Yoga, and also it's emphasized in the Gita. Krishna's emphasizing knowledge, real knowledge, true knowledge, transcendental knowledge. 19. Those whose minds are established in sameness and equanimity. You remember this word equanimity? It's in the second chapter, Krishna's first description of yoga, samatvam, equipoised or equanimity. So that means being a yogi. Those whose minds are established in sameness and equanimity have already conquered the conditions of birth and death. They are flawless like Brahman, and thus they are already situated in Brahman, their true nature. So I'll stop here on 19, and we'll begin again at 5:20. Would anyone like to ask a question, make an observation, and anything? I also like to explore the practical dimensions in our life. I mean, you have all kinds of trends and fads out there, in terms of meditation, in terms of peace, in terms of happiness. I think I told you all this before, one of the most successful courses in existence throughout all history is a current course at Yale University called the Science of Well-Being by Dr. Laurie Santos. And there is a ongoing and active research taking place in academia on the science of happiness. How do we understand what are the main components of happiness? How do we recognize them and incorporate them into our life? It's because everyone wants to be happy. Who doesn't want to be happy? No matter what socioeconomic level you're on, no matter how educated you are, how wealthy you are, etc. Everyone has this innate desire to be happy. So Krishna is giving us the keys here to unlock the mysteries of happiness. I mean, it sounds complex, but really it's not, especially when we apply ourselves to it. Because the application of this knowledge brings upon realizations. And we see, when we begin to see all living entities as soul, it makes it infinitely easier to have this kind of compassion towards all living entities. To feel empathy towards anything that's suffering. Have you ever seen an animal suffer? Because you're all practicing yogis, you probably are suffering too as a result. But yet there are some people, who make a living out of slaughtering animals and become numb to the suffering of those animals that they are slaughtering. So when we talk about peace, there is formulas in the Bhagavad Gita to bring about that peace. And this is what was just being said there. Those whose minds are established in sameness and equanimity, or in yoga, in connection, or being linked up to the Supreme, have already conquered the conditions of birth and death. Because we understand we're not really born, nor do we really die. And that was the whole point that Krishna was making to Arjuna. You think that you're the killer, but the soul cannot be killed. Nainam chindanti shastrani, nainam dahati pavakaha. Soul can't be burned. The soul can't be cut. The soul can't be drowned. The soul can't be withered by the wind. None of these things can affect the soul. So practically, a lot of anxiety comes from the fear of death, especially as we get older. The fear of death, the fear of disconnection. We're disconnected from society. One of the points in terms of research of happiness that Dr. Santos, Dr. Waldinger, Dr. Dan Gilbert from Harvard, Santos is from Yale, Waldinger, I forget, I think he's also from Harvard. One of the things that they find very, very important to happiness is social connectivity. When we feel connected to friends, to community, then it's really one of the pillars of our experience of happiness. And you could see it in your life. You know, you've gravitated towards people because of many different reasons, but you gravitate towards a particular type of person because you yourself are projecting that. Birds of a feather flock together, but you're projecting that and you're seeking that. Or you see someone who has something, a quality in their character that you really want in yours. And, you know, you want to imbibe yourself. And therefore, you know, you seek that kind of association. I was having a discussion with my sister the other day, and she, you know, she was saying, yeah, I like very few people. So I said to her, okay, I understand that. But so find those few people that you like and you're attracted to. And that connectedness, you know, will help you to be happier. And I found in my own life, you know, the very fact that I was fortunate enough to connect with a community of like-minded souls, that kept my drive and determination, you know, on my path of yoga alive and always, you know, well. So, you know, it's that kind of connectedness that we actually need. And this kind of sangha, you know, how many of us, 10 of us, you know, getting together doesn't seem very significant, but it is significant in our lives. One little point made by me or by one of you who makes a comment or asks a question can turn on the light bulb. And that's what's exhilarating about having sangha. And that's what's important about having sangha, especially the right sangha. Because it does provide an abundance of those inspirational moments and experiences. A consistent diet, so to speak, of that kind of inspirational force. Okay, so a little word about the relevancy of Gita. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for joining me this evening. As always, it's a great honor and a great pleasure for me to spend these moments with you. So I thank you. Have a healthy, happy, and holy week, and we'll link up next Wednesday night. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Namaste.